All right, here we go. Check it out. Are there any questions from the notes? Anything we could not find? Did it work? You got it? Okay, all right. Well. Any question? Anything we could not find? What amendment guaranteed citizenship? 13th, there's only 3 of them in this unit. 13th, 14th, and 15th. Which one? Which one? The 13th just freed slaves. The 14th. It also guaranteed people civil rights. The 14th Amendment is the most important part of the U.S. Constitution, by far. Oh, what said the right to vote cannot be taken away? What amendment? The right to vote could not be taken away. That's the 15th. And when I find the 15th, you notice how I said it? I didn't say you have a right to vote. Yes, that's a big difference. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say you have the right to vote to this day. You have no right to vote. But I can't walk, the Congress can't pass a law saying everybody with plaid hair can't vote. They can't do a law like that. But you have no right to vote. Yes. Okay, Civil Rights Act of 1875. The big thing we need to know about, the big thing I want you to know about that was a much stronger Civil Rights Act to enforce voting rights and economic rights for former slaves. But almost immediately, 7 states did enforce it, and the Supreme Court threw it out. The Supreme Court said we don't have to follow this. The Supreme Court just ignored it. And so the Civil Rights Act of 1875 would be the last Civil Rights Act of any importance that would pass until 1964, which is kind of a shockingly long time. There'd be one in 57, but it was meaningless. Yeah.
So, I was wondering with you saying the whole, you can't take away the right to vote, with the whole ballot situation with members being just removed from the ballot, that doesn't actually affect anything in the amendments, correct?
They do all kinds of things. You can make rules that technically apply to everybody to restrict voting if it applies to everybody. But they can be purposely done in a way that it applies to everybody, but it really only focuses on certain people, generally the poor. That's who they got. That's who the targets of the anti-voting laws would be, regardless of color. But that would turn out to be a significant number of former slaves. Yeah. So Reynolds was the first African American elected to the Senate, ironically to the very same seat Jefferson Davis had, and Bruce were members of Congress. Bruce was a member of Congress that was elected. The big thing we need to know about that is a significant number of former slaves were elected to Congress. And Reconstruction governments were very inclusive. Of course, they'd all be elected to one term, basically. Anything else? Anything else? Okay, put your name on it, turn it in. I'll get it back to you as soon as possible. So on the final, I'm gonna, oh yeah. I'm not at your beck and call. What's up? Oh yeah. I'm not going to remind you.
Just keep going.
I remember you didn't get it. All right, turn them up. I'm going to reward you immensely for this. I'll get it back. On the final, even though there'll be a few questions early on, there's going to be kind of a lot of questions in the last month of stuff. I'm just going to alter it a little bit. Does anyone have another extra credit movie? All right, let's get to work. Yeah.
One question about the final. Are we doing it a bit early? The semester final?
Not this semester, second semester.
Okay, so this semester will be on the normal day.
Yeah, so that will be on like whatever date it is.
Somewhere in January?
I think our final is on the 18th. Yeah. But after the AP exam, we will take our year final a week and a half after the AP exam. So we will be done in the middle of May.
For the second semester?
Yeah, for second semester. Maybe we still have to do stuff, but it will be, you know.
It's not, you know, it's creeping up on you.
All right. So where do we quit here? Oh, did you see, what's this a map of? That's Germany. Pretty good, huh? I know what you're saying. It looks nothing at all like my map of the United States from yesterday. And someone asked, where was East and West Germany? So I drew it in. Pretty good, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to brag, but
I can see
topography's
World
kind
War
of my
II.
thing. So we got this Petersburg. Oh no, we got to attrition. Attrition. What is attrition? What's called attrition? Yeah. Yeah. Slowly bleed them out. Kill so many of them. Yeah. Bleed them white, they would say. And Grant didn't want to adopt this strategy. What was the battle where they had this? The charge here. It was at the bloody angle. Yeah, Spotsylvania. What's the biggest problem with Spotsylvania? Vampires. And what's the worst thing about vampires? No. They have no loyalty. Vampires do not trust vampires. And what do you call that where the army on the defensive has an advantage because they could get to spots quicker and shorter supply lines? What is that called? Interior lines. So, this war, this horrible civil war, Lincoln said is being fought for what kind of country? Country based upon what? Yeah. Equality and liberty. And if we lose this war, who have we left out? And everybody who fought in the war, yeah, we let them all down. It can happen. Reconstruction is such a good example how it can happen. And it can happen again. So we have to be vigilant. Or roll the die and hope for the best. So, we mentioned Cold Harbor, right? Is that where 20 minutes, how many Union soldiers went down in 20 minutes? Do you remember that from yesterday? 7,000. Which is just slaughter. Yes? Yeah, Bloody Angle was at Spotsylvania. So, I showed you this picture, right? So let's get to it. Right here, Grant came up with this plan. And Grant's plan was basically this. All right. He knows he's got to adopt attrition. He's kind of stuck, but he thought, I can still do one thing to hasten it. Fake an attack here. Lee will go down, dig trenches like he has been doing. But then, go around with a third of his army and attack Petersburg. Petersburg is an important rail junction. You cut that off, and it will partially, mostly starve the Confederates. One rickety rail line would be, that's all. And the Confederates would be able to hold, that would hasten the attrition. It's a good plan. And it almost worked. They stole a march on Lee. They got to here. Lee quick dug trenches like they had been doing. He said a third of the army built a long pontoon bridge and started marching towards Petersburg. The pontoon bridge is huge. The longest pontoon bridge up to that time ever built by the United States Corps of Engineers. Where'd it go? It was a pontoon bridge. I lost the pontoon bridge. Yes, on.
How long did it take them?
To dig those trenches? The Confederates could dig elaborate trenches by the end of about 4 hours. Men are digging frantically. You know, they would find something, a fence line or something. Look, I gotta show you the pontoon bridge. I will feel horrible. I think I mentioned it once for the Oregon training.
Would it be after this time, or would it be before?
It's before 1845.
Because Grant wasn't quite as big as what he is now.
Grant was, yeah, in the army. Yes. I'm trying to find something, so I'm sorry. All right, here's the pontoon bridge. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, I want to know more about building pontoon bridges. So you anchor these small flat boats, put boards across them, connecting the boats into the planks. But the problem is, horses won't cross. What do you have to do to get horses to cross? No. You ever seen a cattle guard? Why cows and horses won't cross the cattle guard? Because they see the bottom. They see it's a hole and they're scared. So they cover it with straw and dirt so the horses will cross. So the next time you're building a pontoon bridge, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, I'm going to build a pontoon bridge tonight. If you want your horses to cross, cover it with dirt and straw. But pontoon bridges are old. Xerxes the Great, the Persian emperor, built a pontoon bridge across the Dardanelles, connecting Asia to Europe over 1.5 miles long. Do you know where the Dardanelles are? I got to explain everything. That's the talk. I'll show you the Dardanelles. Are you ready? Right here. When they attacked Athens and the Greek alliance, the first pontoon bridge collapsed, and so he naturally did what all Persian emperors do. He had his men flood the water, punish it for destroying the bridge, and the next bridge worked. Yes, he had thousands of men go out into the middle of the ocean with whips and whip the water. The next bridge worked. So you can punish water. That's what we call science. This is for you. All right. The first corps to arrive here was Baldy Smith's corps, the very same corps that led the attack at Cold Harbor. And when he got to Petersburg, he saw what the Confederates have had enslaved people do for years. They dug elaborate trenches around this. Elaborate trenches. And his first thought when he saw those trenches, oh no, it's another Cold Harbor. And he hesitated. He didn't realize that Lee had stripped almost all the men, and there were less than 2,000 men. Most of them were invalids, meaning they had been wounded in previous battles. He could have taken it, but he waited 18 hours. And in those 18 hours, Meade got there, furious, ordered an attack. But by then, Lee made it. And the attack was another slaughter. A golden opportunity right there. And this would evolve into the siege of Petersburg. The Union forces now, they were able to cut off a few of the rail links, but one remained. The Confederates are still just barely hanging on, but they're hanging on. And the election is coming. Soon, oh, this is going to last all the way from June till April, 1864-65, June to April. Hell, both sides dug elaborate trenches. Here is a scene of them, artillery bombardments. Every morning, the Union Army would attack and bombard the Confederates. Every morning. Confederates might shoot a couple back, but they were short of gunpowder. They had to save it. There'd be attacks over, rushing attack, quick rushes to try to take Confederate defenses, patrols to try to take prisoners. Some parts of the trench lines would soon be as close as 50 yards apart, where you could yell at each other, sometimes even closer. If you're caught pretty soon between the trenches, you're dead if it's daylight. Snipers are everywhere ready to pick off anybody going into that land between the trenches. In fact, in this battle, they gave a name for the land between the trenches. Anyone know? That's where no man's land comes from. I think of World War I, the trench warfare there for no man's land, but Petersburg. And soon trenches would stretch all the way from Richmond to Petersburg. You notice they cut off a couple of the rail links, but they were getting a trickle of supplies and holding on. Going into July, Ambrose Burnside, remember Burnside, we mentioned him before, he was right here. Oh, I almost forgot. So, a week from today, I will give you an opportunity for extra credit. If you dress up. You can dress up as who? John. As Calhoun or Ambrose Burnside. That one you have to shave your head. Remember the picture of Burnside. I'll show you a quick picture of this tomorrow. And if you dress up well, I'll give you significant extra credit. Also, Clara Barton, who started the American Red Cross, being nursed during the war. Fluoride Calhoun, because people want to dress up as somebody like a in a dress of the 19th century style. So dress up as a wealthy plantation owner. Or Frederick Douglass. Or John Brown. I'll put the whole list up, but that'll be your choices, okay? Why John Brown? I want to keep the week here. I think I have time. You have a week. You go. Or you can do Burnside and shave your head and then
Or you could get an animal and you could just like tape it on there.
tape a squirrel to your face. Okay. So with that, back to this. So I'll tell you, I'll remind you again tomorrow. I'll give you significant extra credits next Wednesday. All right. And so both sides, the trench warfare is over. Units like in Burnside's corps, we're trying to figure out a way to break through. You're really trying to shield it in the trenches. They were soon big enough they could walk easily, but think about it. Hot, miserable. You stick your head up, you're dead. When it rained, the trenches would flood. Think about the latrines where they're going to the bathroom and what's going to happen. There's dead bodies everywhere. It's just awful. It's covered with lice, misery, but better than sticking your head out. Here, yeah. Huh? What they would do is they would try to rotate men until they got back about a quarter mile to be out of range. And so they could actually, and so occasionally they could sleep at night or in tents outside. It's still hot and miserable, but better than the trench. But there'd have to be men in the trench every night because they might attack and do a night attack. Now, by World War I, the range of the weapons was so big, you might be in reserve trenches, but you had to be in the trenches. They would be ready to. They'd have machine guns if somebody did pop their head up, yeah. And here's an example. This is from Harper's Magazine. So it's an etching. These are Confederates, but Union soldiers did the same thing. They're bored because they're just in this trench looking up at the sky. So they're gambling. But here's a popular game. They put a hat on a bayonet and they would count how many bullet holes would be in that hat in, let's say, 30 seconds from a sniper. See, they're counting the bullet holes right here. They hated snipers. Snipers are rarely taken prisoner. You catch my drift on that? I think you probably understand why nobody likes snipers. And so, then, a regiment from Burnside Regiment, they were hard rock miners from Western Pennsylvania, and they said, oh, we could dig a tunnel. Now this is as old as warfare, a tunnel. This is as old as you go back to the walled cities of ancient Sumeria, where they would dig a tunnel underneath it, dig a tunnel under a wall, and let the wall collapse. That's called undermining. And that's where you get the term mine, and you get the term like a land mine, underwater mine comes from that. So their plan was, and they tried this at Vicksburg too, dig a tunnel and then roll a bunch of barrels of gunpowder and blow it up. Now the thought was the gunpowder wouldn't be strong enough to blow the trench up, but it would send shockwaves and knock them out. Knock them out. And so that was their plan. And so, with that, they began digging. Burnside said, go ahead and dig. Let's see what happens. And they got about halfway, and they realized it might work. They're digging a 4-foot-high tunnel, and they come up with a way. They couldn't use air shafts because the Confederates would see it, to pump air in with this kind of weird foot pedal thing, and it was working. And Burnside went to Meade and said, this might work. So they continued, keep going. At night, they would sneak the dirt out because Confederate spies would see them and know they're digging a tunnel. They knew about this. And then they rolled 300 barrels of gunpowder. They went 100 feet in each direction and rolled all this gunpowder and laid a long gunpowder fuse. You want to like a cartoon fuse. They had electrical fuses then, but they really were unreliable. So they thought this was more reliable. And then the plan was to take a fresh division, a division of soldiers that were determined to fight. And who in the United States Army in 1864 would be the most determined soldiers wanting to fight and prove? Yeah, what they called colored regiments, colored troops. A division of almost all former slaves were chosen to attack in that breach. Now, remember I told you they would shell every morning? And then they would stop. They would shell for about half hour. And then they would stop and let both sides cook breakfast. They'd come out of their bomb roofs, their shelters they call it. They cook their fires, they cook their breakfast. So when do you blow up the mine? Yeah, the thought was, we won't kill you during breakfast. Well, that's when they set it off. Yeah,
how many days exactly did it take to fix the tunnel?
It only took about 3.5 or 2.5 weeks. They picked an area. They picked an area that was about, but they had to be really quiet. But they picked an area that the trenches were about 70 yards apart. So the tunnel itself is about 120 yards, because it has to go under the Union line and out into an area where they can be protected and the Confederates can't see it. And so this plan was, in the middle of night, 4,000 fresh troops would crawl out and lay down in no man's land. Then when the sun came up, they'd do the morning bombardment. They would stop, cook the breakfast, and then they'd light the fuse. And the thought was a muffled explosion is what he would hear. Be loud, but a muffled explosion. But the shockwaves would knock out the Confederate troops and attack right there. It's a pretty good plan. But the last minute, Meade told General Ferraro, who is the commander of this division of black soldiers, he told them, no, you're going to be replaced by a white division. And this division was half strength. They had been at Cold Harbor. They had been at Bloody Angle. They were beat, and they were told. The reason why was there was a myth that Southerners and Democrats in the North, anti-war Democrats, were pushing that the plan of the Republicans was to recruit black soldiers and then have them all killed. So the United States would be a white republic. Remember that white republic stuff? And Meade wanted to say, if this is a slaughter, he wasn't purposely killing them. Huh? And dumb. But he did it. So replace him, General Leadley was the commander of this new division. And they weren't told about the mine, the gunpowder. They were just told that you're going to charge the Confederate lines. And so they all thought, we're dead. They crawled out, Leadley crawled into a bomb-proof, what they call the shelters, and proceeded to drink as much whiskey as a human could drink. He just got drunk and couldn't function. He abandoned his men. So no. And they crawled out. And so, preliminary bombardment. I think about 2,000 men laying there, convinced they're dead. They light the fuse. Now what's going to happen? We all know it. It's like a movie. The fuse is going, and then what? Halfway it goes out. So they had to find a very fast and short volunteer, because the tunnel's only 4 feet tall, to light the fuse and then go as fast as they can go.
Santa's up.
And not enough. They found the sergeant. There's always somebody crazy enough to do it. And he went and lit the fuse and took off running. Now it's getting near the end of the tunnel. And the expectation was it's kind of a muffled explosion. He's just coming out of the tunnel. And what happened? Boom! The whole Confederate line blew up. The whole thing went. And you can imagine just wood and dirt, body parts, all this stuff flew into the air for miles. That guy was running through the tunnel. He was shot out 100 yards, followed by a jet of flame. It shocked everybody. Yeah.
So, like, where they put the barrels? Was it like lined up?
Yeah, they dug out to under the tunnel, then went 100 feet each direction like a T.
And then they just like filled it with.
Yeah, filled it full of gunpowder, as much as they could pack in. And they kept rolling, and they were cramming it in there. That's why it's going to be dubbed the Battle of the Crater. This massive crater was formed. That was, after all the dirt and stuff piled back in, it was about 20 feet deep and almost 100 feet wide. This huge crater. Now, these forces, they kind of got up and they're like, what the heck? They're shocked. And they kind of stumbled to the edge of the crater and do what? They go in. And the problem is, there's sheer edges, they couldn't climb out. They just kind of stumbled in and they're like, what happened? Now, Ferraro's men were the backup forces. And they came charging afterwards, and they're gung-ho. And they went charging towards it, but Ferraro wasn't there. Does anybody want to guess where Ferraro was?
Okay.
What was the name of the movement before the Civil War to try to cut down on drinking? Well, prohibition is to totally get rid of it. Temperance, yeah. So temperance would evolve into prohibition. Ferraro was the leader of the temperance movement. And he was in the same dugout as Leadley, trying to convince him of the evils of drink while Leadley is drunk out of his mind. Anybody want to guess two generals who are going to be court-martialed? Well, Ferraro's troops charged right into the crater kill. And soon there are 7,000 men in the crater. Other forces kind of came up and no one knew what to do. No one's really in charge. And everyone's just shocked by the extent of this explosion. Yes? I'll show you one in a second. But there's no picture at that time, but the Confederates are just going to dump dirt in it, so it's not as big. The crater's still there, not as deep. Well, at the Confederate lines was a group of Confederate soldiers sitting around a campfire. Cooking food for them was a slave. And boom, they went up. A quarter mile away behind the line, so they're outside the trenches, were a group of Union soldiers outside on a fire pit. And they're watching, or they're eating, they're ready to cook their breakfast. They're sitting there, and also this big explosion. Stuff started falling out. They're like this. And also they look, and there's something big coming. It's getting closer and closer. And this is their story. Landing right in the middle of them, on his feet, like this, with that slave. And looking at him. And they're like, whoa! And supposedly he was perfectly fine. Yes, they took him into a tent and charged it, dying to see the flying man. But he lived. So now he's free. But the Confederates started lining the edges of the crater. And they started bringing cannon. And remember that, not grape shot, what is the other one that's even more horrible? What was that called? And they started lifting the cannon up and they started shooting into the sea of men who couldn't get out. And what turned into this such a golden opportunity to save thousands of lives and end the war turned into like another one of these horrible catastrophes, the Battle of the Crater. After the Union took the line, that's what the crater looked like. So here's guys sitting in it right there. So there's all these bodies and the Confederates just shoved her.
Everybody jumped in and shot.
Well, there's no Confederates alive. The Confederates didn't jump in, only Union soldiers. The Confederates were on the line were mostly gone. Yeah.
So wait, the Union and Confederates were just at the same line because of the whole breakfast thing?
No, just at breakfast, they let each side of their different trenches cook breakfast. The Union are on the Union line, the Confederates are on the Confederate line.
Yes, and then Confederate line is blown up via the thing, and then the Unions just came in like, what is this? And just toppled it.
Basically, yeah. Okay. And so, stalemate devolved from there. And the stalemate would go on for months, month after month. And remember, the election is coming up. The election is coming up. If Lincoln loses for re-election, the Confederacy can still win. The Confederacy can still win. Now, I have to do this very quickly. In the West, so while Grant and Meade are advancing that way, Sherman was supposed to take Atlanta. He left the same time Meade left and began that horrible campaign. And this map looked a lot better when I first put it up here. It's kind of worthless, so I put another map. The Confederate commander was Joseph E. Johnston, the guy who Lee replaced when he was wounded. These guys took that mini ball right here in his hip. He survived, but it would leak for the rest of his life. One of the best generals, very cautious, very much a defensive-minded general. But his job is not to win. His job is to keep his army intact until the election. He's the perfect general. He's outnumbered. He has about 45,000 men. Sherman has about 50 or 90,000. And Sherman's basic plan here was to outflank. He has more room to move, and there's mountains there. So unlike Meade, he could use the mountains to shield him. Here's the rail line connecting Atlanta to Chattanooga. And Johnson's on that because that's a supply line. Here's Johnson's army right here. What Sherman did is he attacked here and then sent part of his army in the rear. But Johnston was such a good general, he couldn't be surrounded. He just pulled back. Dug trenches again. They attacked, tried to swing around. He pulled back, pulled back, pulled back, pulled back. He did it 5 times. There were not near the massive bloody battles as in Virginia. But, so I obviously did this very quickly. But by the end of June, Johnston is still holding Atlanta. His army's intact, and it looks like more stalemate. Just like at Petersburg, more stalemate. Atlanta was even more heavily defended than Petersburg. Here are its palisades, and then look at these lines of cheval de frise for miles around Atlanta. Atlanta was a formidable defensive position. And Sherman has got to figure out a way to look like they're going to win before the election. It's only now a few months away. It looks like stalemate again. The other three parts of Grant's plan had failed. Petersburg stalemate and bloody hell. Atlanta stalemate. And the election is coming. Unlike today, candidates were picked at the nominating convention in August. So no one really talked about it except for, ambitious at this time men are thinking about it, but they're not really running. They're not campaigning like today. People did not campaign for themselves like today. Yeah.
So, this kind of leads campaigns, it sounds like kind of a disaster. Screwed up a lot. Is there like any talk of him just being fired or stepping down?
Well, the problem was since Grant was riding with them, and Grant's an overall command, it's also Grant's campaign. And Meade, they're going against a very good army with a very good general. So any mistake, they lost, Well, unlike today, they're not campaigning, but this is right after the Battle of Antietam. And there's Lincoln meeting McClellan. And those would be the two people in the election. McClellan is back. And, McClellan was about 5'5", and Lincoln was 6'4". Lincoln was our tallest president. Who's our second tallest president? George H.W. Bush. Then Clinton and Trump are about the same. Clinton, Trump, and Obama are about all the same. So,
Who's their shortest?
James Madison. Under 5'4". So, the Union Party was created for one election. And it was basically made up of Republicans, Abraham Lincoln, and some Democrats they called war Democrats. And so the VP would be Andrew Johnson, a Democrat. Now the Union Party was for just one ticket. So they could say, these are Republicans and Democrats, bipartisan for union. And Johnson was not only a Democrat, he was from Tennessee. He stayed loyal to the country, and therefore they could push this idea that we're bringing the country together. But I will have to be clear, even though they're calling themselves Union for one election, he's a Republican and is a Republican, or was a Republican and would always be. There's a Democrat. They didn't call themselves Union Party members. It was just an election ploy. So that's Lincoln, and that angry toad was Johnson. Hey, our first president to be impeached. That's what we call foreshadowing. And that's to win the war. McClellan will be the Democratic nominee. And he pledged to finish the war. I will not let down the soldiers I trained and loved me for training them. I will not let them down. But everybody knew a vote for McClellan was a vote to end the war. If McClellan won, he would have to end the war, and the United States is done. And that is what Lee has to hold out in Petersburg for, and Johnston in Atlanta. Hold out. Now, here is a Republican cartoon, and it's showing you vote for McClellan, and he's shaking hands with Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, and a slave auction, union and slavery. But a vote for Lincoln. Do you remember what a guy with a paper hat is? Worker. Workers were symbolized by men in paper hats to protect your hair. I know. What would paper do? But just go with it on that. Union and liberty. But what's this? What is this? It's a school. And who's going to this school? You notice it's integrated. What a big shift in the United States in just 4 years. Abraham Lincoln, sure, he was free soul and despised slavery, but his ultimate idea was if slavery could be eliminated, the freedmen, the former slaves, would be sent to where? Africa. And now the Republicans are running on integration. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
What happened caused that sudden shift in the war?
Yeah, the fight for liberty. And once they turned into we're fighting for ending slavery. And then a combination of how many former slaves volunteered. It's like they deserve more. Not sure what yet for some of the leaders of the Republican Party. But you now all of a sudden have Lincoln talking equality. It's a big shift. Here's but stalemate. With stalemate at the front, it looks like McClellan victory. So here's a Democratic cartoon of McClellan bringing Davis and Lincoln together. But that is so garbage because if McClellan is elected, there's a Confederacy. And the United States is done. Oh, sure, there might be something called the United States. But it would not be what we know as the United States. And I can guarantee you this, the western part of what is now the United States would not have been part of that country. Probably been a separate country. Everything we know would be different. I mean, this is like, it's changing. Lincoln was so distraught and depressed that he would write a letter, because he knew he couldn't do it after the election, a letter congratulating McClellan. Because by the end of August, he figures it's over and the country's done, and he has failed. He went into a dark depression. He suffered from depression. We would call that today suffering from depression. Back then, they didn't call it that. He wrote a letter congratulating McClellan for the victory and telling McClellan, we will do whatever it takes to win the war before you're inaugurated, because we won't be able to win. Yeah.
Did he send that?
No, he put it filed away in his desk and saved it up. Mm-hmm. I have to text my sister-in-law. So my nephew from Germany came. He was in third period, now he's up in Mr. Phillips' room. So I let him come to a couple of classes. He said in my third period class, he'd be equivalent of a sophomore. He's flying back to Berlin tomorrow. So he wanted to come look at class, and I just got a call or text her and tell her you can come pick her up. Because he can only stay for a couple periods because he's flying out tomorrow. If he would be staying for another day, I would let him come the whole. He would have came the whole day. But you know how it is. He's got 25 hours of plane flight time. He has to fly from Denver to Munich tomorrow. That's about 11 hours. That's longer than the Buford and Helena. So, do you mind if I text him real fast? Yeah.
So close.
All right, here we go. So, who's going to save the Union? Who will save the Union? Who is going to come in and save the Union? We all know one person. Who? Who? Calhoun's dead.
Ready?
How about his brother Raoul C. Calhoun? He's made up. He's not real.
Oh.
Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, hated Joseph E. Johnston and thought he wasn't aggressive enough. So Johnston, who did an amazing job saving his army, was fired at the end of August. He fired him and replaced him with the most aggressive general in the entire Confederate Army, John Bell Hood. By the way, Hood looks bad there. He lost an arm and a leg already in fight. And he would die of yellow fever in 1867. Yeah.
Where did you use these advantages? Where did you use these like?
Second Bull Run and Gettysburg.
Where did you lose it like?
Huh?
Do you say he?
He lost his leg. He lost leg and use of his arm.
Oh,
Okay, so with that, Hood did what Hood and Lee told him, don't pick Hood. He picked Hood, and Hood attacked. And attacked Sherman's army that outnumbered him 2-1. And in the process, Hood destroyed his army. 3 really big fights that we dubbed the Battle of Atlanta. And Hood had no choice but to evacuate Atlanta, and Sherman's army marched in September 1st and 2nd, 1864. And overnight, it's like somebody flipped the switch. And Lincoln all said, we can win. And in the North, we can win the war. We can win the war. Atlanta has fallen. Atlanta will be one of the most important victories in American history. Because all of a sudden now, all of a sudden it looked like the war could end. Yeah. 64. If I said 84, I didn't mean to. It took them 20 years to finally walk in. And then at the same time, a Union fleet under Admiral David Farragut sailed into Mobile Harbor and took the last major harbor in the Confederacy. Another huge victory. Farragut, who was by then 66 years old, was lashed to the riggings of his flagship, the Hartford, because he had vertigo and he didn't want to fall during the battle, so he tied himself right here. They were fighting the Confederate gunboat, the Texas, and they were only 8 feet apart, blazing away, and he's hanging over this, watching this. That's crazy courage. Now it gets 66 into Virginia, and with Mobile falling and Atlanta was a biggie, but the Mobile was like icing on the cake. The election overnight became a Lincoln sweep. The Army loved McClellan, but voted for Lincoln. And so you can see, he swept most of the states. Now, McClellan still got 1.8 million votes. But remember, it's the Electoral College. So he couldn't win many states. So, his home state of New Jersey, for example. You also see 2 new states that were created since the beginning of the war. West Virginia and Nevada. Solely for one purpose, to vote for a Republican president in 1864. You might know a state that was created 15 years later for that very same purpose. Montana. And both Dakotas. And Idaho. So, there's Lincoln in Harper's Magazine. He grew another 5 feet. No, I just like that picture because now he's, very tall with the election. The victory, they really exaggerate that. And Lincoln overnight became from despised to, okay, he'll lead us to victory. Now, Hood, sitting right here, last couple things really quick. Hood right here, he didn't know what to do. So he attacked Tennessee. And in December 1864, he destroyed his army. He destroyed his army in front of Nashville. The Confederate Army of the West was gone. One of the most decisive victories of the war. Just gone. Devastated. Sherman is sitting in Atlanta. And Sherman sent a letter to Grant and Abraham Lincoln after the election, basically proposing a plan to take the war to the South, to finally get them to quit. The war is over, but they're unwilling to quit. In World War I, the Germans will come up with a name for this. That what Sherman had proposed. Now, it's old as war has been, but with modern technology, it's more deadly. In fact, it's going to become the most horrible thing ever created by humankind. Yes? It's called total war. Total war. This is the most horrible thing you can imagine. If you can't win on the battlefield, win an outright victory, you expand the battlefield. They can't fight if they can't get food. They can't fight if they can't get weapons. So target industry and transportation. But how do you knock out a factory in 1864? How do you get there? You're right, but you attack civilians. You make everybody a combatant. You go after people at home. You make them suffer so much, starve them, not drive them out of their homes, even kill them. Hey, they won't go to work in the factories anymore. You make them suffer so much they want to quit fighting. So in World War I, they're going to have names for where the armies were meeting, these mass armies in World War I. So they'll be like, you might have heard these terms. Probably have. Like the Western Front, the Eastern Front, the Mesopotamian Front. And a new front was developed because of this, called the Home Front. Every war is now fought this way by every country. And they target civilians. And they make them suffer so much that they want to quit the fight. Now, Sherman was not thinking, how do I make the most horrible thing ever created by humankind? He just wanted to end the war. But this is going to have a horrible logic. Because once you decide you can target civilians to win the war, two things. They might target your civilians. And once you decide you can target them, what can you do to civilians? If they're a legitimate target, what can you do? You name it. White phosphorus, napalm, high explosives. You might have heard of something called atomic bombs. You decide to do that.
Nuclear gas bombs that basically melted the lungs. Oh, also, remember how I told you about
You know, I have to run upstairs.